Welcome to the Ask Ralph podcast, where listening to an experienced financial professional can help you make sense of confusing questions, current headlines, and industry trends about taxes, small business, financial decision-making, investment strategies, and even the art of proper budgeting, as Ralph makes the complex simple by sharing his real-world knowledge with all things financial. Now here's your host, Ralph Estep Jr.
Well, thanks for joining us today. I've got a very special guest coming up today, and that is Jason Bockniak. He's a mortgage expert with New Fed Mortgage, and Jason and I get into a great discussion about the state of the economy and the mortgage industry and how that directly impacts all of our listeners. So stay tuned for a great interview with Jason and some real economic ideas that we discuss.
Ask Ralph will be right back.
Hey, I want to take a few minutes and just tell you about the latest book I've written. The name of the book is Mastering Your Finances, Your Personal Guide to Financial Freedom. And listen, folks, it's not just a book. This is an actual roadmap to securing a thriving financial future. As a seasoned accountant, I penned this book to put the power of financial planning right at your fingertips. This book will transform your financial landscape from a confusing maze of numbers and jargon to a clear and well-trodden path towards prosperity. This book is written for every potential user, from the first-time person trying to get their finances in order to a well-seasoned person who's been trying to do this for a long time. So what I want you to do is to discover the profound impact of strategic planning as you journey through real-life examples, practical tips, and insightful advice. This book is more than a guide. It's a lifeline to financial literacy and independence. This is a way for you to take control of your financial destiny and embrace the freedom that comes with financial stability. This book is an essential read for anyone seeking to navigate the world of personal finance with confidence and ease. The book is available right now on Amazon.com. You just search for the name Ralph Estep, and you can get it either on paperback or on Kindle. So check it out when you get a chance.
And now back to the podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Ask Ralph, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of finance and bring you expert insights to help you make informed decisions. I'm your host, Ralph Estep Jr., and today we have a special guest joining us. Please welcome Jason Bockniak, a mortgage expert from New Fed Mortgage. Jason, it's great to have you on the show.
Man, Ralph, thanks for having me back. It's been such a long time since we talked. How have you been?
I've been good, my friend. It has been a while. We took a little hiatus on the podcast, but we're bringing it back now so that we can, give our listeners something useful for them to listen to and to hopefully gain some insight from. So, Jason, let's jump right into it. I'd like to start by discussing the current state of the mortgage industry. What do you see are some key trends or changes you've observed in the industry, especially in light of the ongoing economic challenges we're all facing?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a great question, and it's such a broad and open question. But some of the key trends that I'm seeing right now is, just the volatility in the interest rates. So I think the best way to answer that question would be to go back to some of the historical things that have happened. So if you go back to, say, 2022 was a very interesting year. If you look at the beginning of 2022, coming out of that refi boom right around January, things were looking really strong. And then going into February, there was some indications that things were going to get a little tough. And then February 2022, it looked like the government was going to stop quantitatively easing. And that's when the 30-year fixed interest rate kind of shot up, and that was when the beginning started happening. And
that's really had a huge impact on the market too, man. I've seen it in my own client base. It really took the affordability factor of mortgages and really took it off the table for some people.
It did. It was traumatic on a bunch of fronts. There was a lot of retooling, I guess you could say. There was a lot of changes that had to happen within mortgage companies, and it's a trickle-down effect. It affects everybody as far as people, fixed staff, and mortgage companies. Big changes that have to happen all across the board. If you look at it and you look at why these things happen, and we're going to go kind of deeper into it as we go through the interview. But if, like I said, if you go back to 2022 and you look at just the Fed raising the prime rate, it's so much more than that. It looks like if we go back 20 plus years ago, or even shorter than 20 years ago, if you go back into when the crash of the economy happened in 2008 and the government got involved, it looks like that quantitative easing helped out with keeping the rates down. And quantitative easing is where the government kind of goes in and buys everything. They kind of just make it a level playing ground so that things are cheaper in
But
essence.
Jason, do you feel like the government intervention has been a little too heavy-handed at this point?
I feel it has. I feel it has, and I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm the forefront person to talk about it, but I know enough to be a little bit dangerous. So I can say that I would feel that at one point the Fed rate would have to go up, and I would say that I feel that they waited a little bit too long to raise the Fed rate. But I feel that raising it at the last minute to try and stave off inflation, I think that they waited just a little bit too long. What do you think,
But
Ralph?
now I think, well, I think you're probably right. And I think they might have been a little too aggressive in the amount that they increased things. But now I think we're seeing a trend of some downward, seeing the things going down. Do you see that in your industry as well?
Well, I'll tell you what. And that's a great point that you bring up. So there's a couple aspects to that. The problem that I see, or what I do see, I think it's more smoke and mirrors. I think that because of the totality of what's happening, we have an election year coming. It's the holiday season. I think that we've got a spike in consumer confidence because on the retail side, people are purchasing more due to the holiday season. And I think that that's giving a false hope of reassurance in our economy because some retail numbers are coming out pretty good. But I think when that settles and we see that, okay, purchasing is just abruptly stopped, and now it's time to start making payments on that real high interest rate credit card debt that's been acquired due to all the purchasing for gifts due to the holidays. I think that that's when we're really going to get the punch again for the inflation. Do you
And
feel?
I think you're absolutely right. I was telling clients 2 years ago, listen, I really feel like mortgage rates are going to triple. And they've gotten close to that. And I was telling clients I felt like we were in line for another Great Depression. And I still feel like we're on the cusp of that. Like, you hear this, in the news talking about how the economy is getting better. I just don't see the fundamentals in it.
Yeah. Well, I have looked at some things, and if you're open to it, I have a viewpoint. I kind of talked to you about this before the call.
Yeah,
And if
absolutely.
if
Let's
you're
hear
open
what you
to
have
it,
to
I'd
say.
like to tell you something that I've looked at, and this in no way is political. This is just a viewpoint that I've taken, and I've always been a fan of looking at the historical data and looking at the past and seeing, can the past be a measure to see or be a lesson of, should we look at the past and have it as a lesson so that if it does repeat itself, are we aware and open to seeing if we can learn from it, right? So if we go back and look.
Yeah, let me just interject one thing. As long as we don't have to put our tinfoil hats on, I'm all aboard.
Yeah, we don't have to do that. This isn't conspiracy theory. This isn't any of that stuff. We're not going to be back to the future, right? But
Very
there is
cool.
something that just happened recently. It's controversial and everything, but it happened and it was broadcast all over. It was traumatic, right? But it's repeating itself almost identical, and anyone can go and research this, right? So there's this beautiful document. It's called the Primary Mortgage Market Survey summary page with all rate types, U.S. averages, and then Freddie Mac publishes it. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and all you have to do is go on to Google Chrome and just Google it, do Freddie Mac historical rates, and it'll give you an Excel spreadsheet from the last 50 years. And
Yeah,
if you
cool. And Jason, if you'll send me a link for that, I'll make sure I add it to the show notes for this
Yeah,
particular podcast.
absolutely. Yeah. I'll shoot you a link for it. And if you scroll back all the way
Mhm.
back till when Jimmy Carter was president, and what I want to do is set the stage. So I want to just show that history's repeated itself. Okay.
Absolutely.
So when Jimmy Carter was president, he had a situation with Iran where there were some hostages taken. Everybody knows about it. There was 54 hostages, 53, 54 hostages that were taken, and they were held for 444 days. And if I remember history right, it was 2 days after he left his administration, 2 days into Reagan's presidency, that the hostages were released. And it was an amount of money, about $8 billion, that was released from or to Iran that was given back, and it was all related to oil. right? So if we look at the interest rates, given that scenario, and I don't want to bloviate or go into the dynamics of all of it, but let's just take three pieces out of it: hostages,
Absolutely.
Iran, and oil. Okay. And let's look at where the rates were. So on the chart that I have in front of me, if I look at the interest rate where it was during that whole crisis, because that happened somewhere around, early 79 and it wasn't over until 80, 81. So if you look at it, the interest rates were at 10.4% January 19th, 1979. When the hostages were released, the interest rate was in 1981, same time, right around 15.4%. So I'm not implying that the interest rates are going to go that high, but I'm talking about the elasticity of how long the rate stayed high. So
But
if you,
and I remember that, Jason, because as I was about 8 or 9 years old, I remember going to the bank and getting what they called a passbook savings account, and it was the coolest thing ever because it was making money. I mean, it
yeah,
was really it was making money. You don't see that now.
no, you don't see that. Now, these aren't bank rates, though, Ralph. These are the 30-year fixed mortgage rates.
I
That's,
understand. I
yeah,
got you. Sure,
yeah.
absolutely.
But the prime rate was up, right? So if you look at this chart that I'll send you, interest rates didn't start falling down into the single digits until I'm looking at it right now, probably 1989, going through 89, 90. I'm still scrolling down. Yeah, they didn't get into the single digit rates until 1990, going into 91. So
Hmm.
we had double digit mortgage interest rates as a result of this crisis that happened with Iran and what had happened. And I started digging deep the other day. I started reading about it, and there's all these Freedom of Information Act articles, and you can go into Jimmy Carter's library and you can pull up specific documents related to that crisis that are in his library. It's almost like a biography of what happened and how he dealt with that crisis. And there's a couple documents related to a windfall tax that was levied upon domestic oil production in the United States. So again,
Okay.
I'm not talking conspiracy theory. I'm talking about factual things that happened. And regardless of what side of the spectrum on fossil fuels you're on, if I am a person that's just talking about basic high school economics, here you have an administration that stymied oil production domestically while there was a global oil crisis going on with a windfall tax to prevent the U.S. oil production from happening. So let's fast forward now all the way through to the Biden administration, and let's look. And it was all under the guise of there was issues with Iran, there was issues with oil, and then we mix in hostages. So let's,
And I completely remember that because my family was in the gas station business at the time. So
yeah,
I completely remember that as a kid.
it's crazy,
Absolutely.
right? And the first, if you go back even further, 1973 is when the gas shortages happened. That's when the gas lines were happening, fights and stuff
Sure.
like that. But this was later on. This was in 79. So now fast forward to when we cut this $8 billion check to Iran to release some funds to them about, I don't know, what was it, 4 or 5 months ago, 6 months ago. But just look at how history is repeating itself. Okay. We have this vile situation where Hamas, backed by Iran, invaded Israel, took 200 and some odd hostages, and now we have this global fight again. And here we have an administration that has, under the guise of global warming and the climate, once again stymied domestic oil production. And they'll say, "Well, we're pulling more oil out of the ground," but they're not refining it, right?
Right.
And
Absolutely
under
right.
the
No, you're 100% on point on
yeah,
that.
and under the EPA, they're punishing refiners for violations, this, that, and the other thing, and they're stymieing the one thing that's made our country wealthy. And again, I'm not an economic professional, but it's basic high school economics. Oil's what made this country rich. It's part of our GDP. And if you're at one point a handful of years ago, if you're the global dominant producer of refined fuels and you are energy independent, and then something changes and you become not energy independent, and then everything catastrophic happens to your economic sphere and it has a global effect and it kind of points to one thing, it's a pretty easy fix. So,
Oh, you're absolutely right. So, not to cut to the chase, but let's cut to the chase. So, what exactly are you saying, Jason? Like, how are you extrapolating it out, and what is that telling
well,
people?
so here's the data that I'm pulling. You remember that movie, The Big Short, right? The actor that Christian Bale played. It's kind of like that kind of moment. And I'm in no way saying I'm that guy at all. But what I'm just saying is, I'm sitting here looking at these rates, and I'm looking at the elasticity of it, meaning how long was that rate high, right? So
Sure.
I listen to radio shows all day long, and they're like, "Hey, the rates are coming down. They're coming down," and I'm listening to all these bobbleheads talk about, man, the rates are going to come down. This is what's going to happen. But I go on every day to a website called MBS Live. M as in Mike, B as in Bravo, S as in Sam. It stands for mortgage-backed securities. MBS Live, it illustrates the coupon and how the coupon trades for investors. And the coupon is basically the beginning of a mortgage-backed security. So it's an indicator for us on where rates are going to be for that day, and I'll talk about that in a second. So,
Sure.
what to answer your question, if you look at how long the rates were double digit and how long they were high, and again, to break it out, I'm not talking about the fact that rates are going to go double digit. I'm talking about a measure about how long I feel personally these rates are going to stay up. So if I
What
look,
you're talking about is what you would consider what I would consider the recovery period. Would
yes,
that be correct?
exactly, right.
Right. What
So
you're talking about, what is the recovery period for when we get to back
yeah,
into some sanity in the rate market?
yeah, and look at just the paradigms here. Look at the characteristics, the parallels, not the paradigms, the parallels. So here
Sure.
we had back in '79, we had Democrat rule, hostages, Iran, we had those categories, right? And we had a situation where there was a windfall tax against domestic oil production. All right, we'll call that
Sure.
the EPA. Here we have the same exact stuff, different names, different flavors, but it's happening today. The domestic oil's been stymied, and the whole world is not better because of it, right? And we're involved
Yeah,
in all
and the
these.
truth is, I mean, without getting too political, it's back to the Iranians again. Let's just be blunt
It
about
it
that.
is it is right. But check this out. It's the same exact thing as the Jimmy Carter years. Just bullet point for bullet point, right? So if I look at this chart for how long the rates stayed high, yeah, we're probably looking at 7-8 years for rates
Sure.
staying up before they start coming down again. Now, I could be wrong, and I hope to God I'm wrong, right? But within these rates, if I look at them, there was some good days, and it was right around the holiday season. It was right around when Christmas was. It was right around when gift giving happens. If you go back and look, and I'm going to send you this, and when we get off this call, you'll see some of that, right? So
Sure.
I hope to God I'm wrong, but it also corresponded when there was Republican elections, like Ronald Reagan became president. But it wasn't until after a good 12 years of Republican rule that the rates started coming down after everything came back. And I do remember, as a younger person, when Ronald Reagan came into office, I remember him being very good for jobs, him being very good for building contractors. I remember him being very stern on the global stage. I remember him, sinking ships. I remember him.
And the truth is, I mean, everyone says, when he was, leaving his tenure, it was morning in America.
Yeah,
And the truth is, I mean, looking back at it as a kid, and a teenager, I'm thinking the exact same thing. Is it was morning in America,
yeah.
and he really had to start from scratch and kind of rebuild.
It did. It did. I mean, I'm a U.S. Navy veteran, and I talked to we have some Navy veterans that are on a just a long message board that we have in Messenger, and it's some of the stuff we talk about is just we're just disappointed. We're disappointed at how the military's gone. Your military is your defender out there, and just the woke nature of how it's gone. It's just terrible. Not to cover that today,
No,
but
you're absolutely right. And listen, I want to say this: I appreciate your service. My son's in the Coast Guard, so I totally
yeah,
get where you're coming from. And without getting too political, the wokeness has gotten to an extreme.
that's tough,
That
man.
is absolutely
China,
true.
China's not worried about how a person feels. They're just churning out people to go defend their country. But let's talk about that MBS website, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
here is do you know what the word juxtaposition means? It's a fancy word, right? But it's a beautiful word, right? So if you look at when things started getting really crazy, I went and looked at the mortgage-backed securities or the MBS Live website, and I'll send you a couple pictures of this after the interview. But there's the 5.5 coupon, and you could pull up one screen that shows a graph of what the 5.5 coupon looked like during the 2008 crash. And the 5.5 coupon was would cost, or it had a price of 97.09. And basically what that means is if you were an investor and you were trying to buy $100 million worth of that coupon, it would basically cost you 2.97 or $3 million. Let's round up and say $3 million it would cost you of your 100 million to buy that block of loans, mortgage-backed securities. Well,
Gotcha.
the other day, I want to say, and I'll give you the date, and I'll tell you what I mean by this. On November 13th, it would have cost you roughly $6 million to buy that same block of loans.
Wow.
Now, nobody talked about that. Nobody said anything about that. But if you look at that, that's a measure of how bad that coupon is. Well, people will say, well, the rates are higher. Well, if you look at it, 2008, back when 2008 happened, that was supposed to be the worst cataclysmic thing that's ever happened to our market, to our financial sector. That was the worst thing ever that's happened. And that coupon only went down to 97.09 or 03, and then
Right.
the other day it went down to 94 and some change. So what I'm talking about is the hush hush by the media and the hush hush by so many outlets covering up how bad things really are.
And
It's
so I
truly
think you and I
enlightening.
are sort of and we're on the same page, aren't we?
Yeah.
So you're seeing that the economy is not in good shape, is what you're
It's
basically
not,
saying.
man. I'm seeing things that are just not pointing towards healing, and it's a product of the fact that we're spending so much money and not and we're it's not just the spend, it's the future allocation of the money, and it's the
Oh,
legislation
absolutely.
where we've allocated the spend over time, and I think we have to undo a lot of that in future you know future
No, I
legislation.
got you. So allow me to circle back a little bit. And because we're talking about, your particular industry, how does this impact my listeners? How does that impact the person who is potentially looking to refinance their home? Or let's say how does it impact the person who's looking to buy their first home or buy their first
Yeah,
farm
great,
or something
great,
like
great
that?
questions, and we'll talk about the farm stuff in a minute, right? So
Hmm.
I've done some calculations to prepare for this call. If you're a family that makes about $85,000 combined a year, you're a first-time home buyer. Let's say you're just a couple, and you've got a combined income of about 85,000, and that's a pretty stiff combined income. Incomes have come up. Let's say that you're both making 18 to 20 dollars an hour, somewhere in there.
Well, incomes had to come up because the cost of everything
For
has come up.
for
You know what I
sure,
mean?
for
The
sure.
inflationary pressures have been brutal.
Yeah, you can afford with about 85 grand. Your max purchase price, unfortunately, is about 300,000. And to put
Right?
things in perspective, you're familiar with Newark area, correct? Yeah, so
Absolutely.
Brookside, there was homes that have just sold for 324, 999 at Brookside, and
Wow.
that's a concrete pad, 1,300 square foot, 3 bedroom home that's aged, built in the 50s. So
Yeah, as I was going to say, those were built, soon after the Second World War, if I remember
yeah,
correctly.
yeah, and then Newkirk Estates, Sycamore Gardens. These homes were sold originally for $5,000 to $8,000 back in the late 50s,
Wow.
early 60s, and here they're selling in the low threes. So this is definitely not going to change. And my biggest fear is home values and home prices. They're not going to go down anytime soon, just because of supply and demand. What's going to have to change is mortgage interest rates are going to have to go down. Will the government start quantitatively easing again? I don't know if that's going to happen. And that component is something that was definitely in place for a very, very long time. Are you familiar with the term quantitative easing?
Yes, I'm certainly not an expert on that, but I think the biggest concern a lot of experts have is it could cause, that whole deflation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me just tell you. I'll give you and forgive me if there's anybody that's going to be critical of what I'm saying. Forgive me if I'm using the wrong term. But
Right.
the Treasury came in and the Treasury was buying or purchasing. They were one of the biggest investors that were purchasing mortgage-backed securities, bonds, all that good stuff, and it was pushing the price for the coupon down very low, and it was taking off a lot of risk for a lot of the bad paper as a result of 2008 and the collapse and the crash, and it was very,
Sure.
very helpful. In March of 2022, they just stopped buying that as one of the provisions of raising the prime rate. And when they raised the prime rate, the idea was let's raise the rate in order to stop the increase in prices and increase inflation and all that. But it backfired, and it backfired. I can't tell you why it backfired, but it backfired. And it's a tough thing. Now, home buyers are facing great challenges because, in my opinion, for greed. Sellers are getting top dollar, and in my opinion, are getting it for all the wrong reasons. The real estate agents are working in conjunction to try and smooth some of the tougher ways to go about selling a house. But if you're a home buyer, your options are really, really tough on how to buy the house, because in some cases you're forced to buy a house with limited benefits. Like, you're forced to buy a house with the contingency that you have to pay the difference between what the house is worth and what the seller wants to sell the house for. You're sometimes often forced to buy the house with inspection for informational purposes only. There are just some things that you have to accept that you normally wouldn't accept in a buyer's market. But that's the sad side effect of buying a house in a market where there isn't a lot of inventory. On the other side, there is new construction out there. There are some good builders that are building some good homes, but the wait time for that is going to probably be greater than a year or a little over a year. There are some good builders down south that have a lot of communities that are building, but then we have a logistical issue with supply and demand shortages as a result of some things that are going on with building materials. I just off topic, but I just heard the other day the Panama Canal is experiencing one of the biggest droughts that they've.
Yeah, that's a huge
Yeah,
issue.
did you hear about that?
Absolutely. They don't have enough water to use the lock
Just
system, I
just
understand.
nuts. Like, coming into our winter, it's their drought season, isn't it? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and it's kind of like the whole world, I like to use this term, has gone cattywampus.
Cattywampus. Yeah.
And it really has, and so many things that we considered in our, in the professional industry as being fundamentals just don't
Yep.
make sense right now.
It doesn't. And here are some facts, and this is something that I look at. If you go 3 years back, given if you take all the emotion out of it, you just look at some factual information. If we go 3 years back and we compare the administrations that we had in place, take the pandemic away from it. Nobody can control the pandemic. That was why that happened or how that happened. Let's just take that off the board. But during the Trump administration, there was these are things that you can look up, and you're an accountant, so you can validate these right on the spot. There was more income tax money coming into the Treasury than ever in recorded history. You can validate that, correct?
Absolutely. And the truth is, regardless of your position, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I have very few clients. Most of my clients are business clients or, a little bit higher wealth people who wouldn't tell you that during the Trump administration, the economy was the best they'd seen in years.
Yep. And
That's fact. That's just fact. There's no argument there. That's just fact. Now, there's a lot could be said about personalities and all those other things that go along with it. But the truth is, factually, the economy was so much better. Just true. It's just
so much better, right? And then if you look, like, I can say this: when I was a small child, I was about 5 or 6 years old. I was a short, scrawny little kid. I remember walking in. My dad was an engineer for a company called Specialty Composites over on Darwin Drive in the Delaware Industrial Park there. And I remember walking in back into the factory, or not the factory, but just back into the area where they were making the product that they make. And I remember my dad stepping into a gentleman and just really giving him a tough time. And I looked at my dad, and I was kind of, I'm 5, I don't know anything, but I was emotionally upset that my dad had yelled at a person the way he yelled at the person and held him to account. And then I got in a car with my father, and I was like, Dad, why did you yell at that man? And my father said, he's a good man. He gets off track sometimes, but son, when you get older, you'll understand. When you run a company, you have to run it sometimes like a velvet hammer, but you got to let the people know that who have promise and who have hope. Sometimes you have to step into them really hard and remind them that that their job is important, but oftentimes that they can be replaced if they're not performing up to standards. And in this case here, this man has to understand that his job is so critical and so important that we need him in this position. And as a leader of this business, I have to make hard cuts sometimes. And I had to enlighten him that I will replace him if he doesn't show up to work on time, and I will make hard cuts. And I had to use hard language because that was the only way that he understands how to do things. And I often sometimes think about, how Trump ran the country, and, everybody's all soft these days. And, Trump sometimes uses hard language, calls people's names and stuff like that. But, the country has an EIN number. The country is a business, and a business should be run by a businessman, in my opinion. The country shouldn't be run by a politician. It should be run by a businessman. So, going forward, I just hope whoever gets elected has the ability to run a business. You know what I mean? And not
Jason,
just
I
speak.
absolutely, you have spoken the truth here, my friend. I couldn't agree with you more. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. So listen, we don't have a whole lot more time, but I wanted to give you some time to talk about what's going on there with New Fed Mortgage and what kind of programs you're offering.
Yeah, that's a great segue. Yeah, and I appreciate the time you've given me. So, two things that I want to talk about. So, New Fed, NEW, F as in Frank, ED, New Fed Mortgage. It's a company based out of Danvers, Massachusetts. It's a great company. I could tell you one of the beautiful things about the company, and if I could use one word to describe them, it's stability. And talking about the company, they have a 4-digit NMLS number, and it begins with a 1. And the NMLS number is Nationwide Mortgage Licensing System number. I might have slaughtered that, but that's what it is.
No, I got you. That means they were early to the party.
Early to the party. It's 1881. There are some others that are smaller, but if you go online, you'll have a tough time trying to find them. So they're very stable, meaning they service their own mortgages. They're a Fannie Freddie seller servicer. They have a considerable amount of money in servicing, and that servicing covers the operational costs for the business. They're fiscally sound, and they have, I want to say, probably anywhere from 50 to 60 loan originators. I may, forgive me if I'm wrong on that, maybe slightly more. But from the ground up, it's a family of loan originators, support underwriters, management team that are all consumer centric and like-minded in the fact that they want to help the general public get through this tough time and make originating a loan from A to Z be a very smooth process. And most of the folks that are in our company have been in a business for a very, very long time and understand how to treat a client, how to talk to a client, and have earned the intuition to understand what questions to ask and the timing on those questions to get that file through underwriting, which is really important.
And that's what it all comes down to, because if I'm looking to buy that house, the biggest obstacle is getting through the mortgage process.
It is.
I mean, I've been through it a few times myself, and it's nerve-wracking at times. I mean, it really is.
It really is. So the reason I had reached out to you a couple of days ago, I know that you've got a hobby farm of your own. I don't know if your listeners were aware of that. I don't know if you wanted me to air that out there, but
no, it's absolutely fine. No, absolutely. I'm not we have the Estep farm, which we raise Black Angus beef on the micro level. Sure, absolutely. That's not a secret at all.
So in doing that, there is a company out in Illinois. It's called Compeer Lending, and it's COMPEER Lending, and they allow us to wholesale their products. And to my knowledge, I'm the only company on the East Coast that has access to their program products right now, and I'm very happy about that until other companies get signed up with them. I'll just give you some of the highlights. They do 15 and 30-year fixed rate financing. Some of the products that they have, they work with single family residences, purchase, refinance, cash out. And the big part is they'll do 160 plus acres, large acre areas. You can have outbuildings, barns, silos, stables. You can have livestock, cattle, goats, horses, pasture land or tillable acreage, Schedule F income, and up to 3 dwellings on the property. So I'll give you a scenario. Let's say you had a property that's got a 56-acre hobby farm, and then you have a barn for animal shelter with an equine facility with about 10 stalls, and then you have a pasture and tillable acreage. That's something that we could finance as long as that tillable acreage or maybe some of the animals, goats or something, produced about $500 a year in income. That would be the signifier. So like if you're
And Jason, what people don't know, and I've been through this process, if you go to your average mortgage company, they're going to send you in another direction because they're not going to touch that. They're going to have no concept of how to.
They don't know anything about it, right? And there's a couple of examples of it. You know, there's a property, and I'm not going to dime the address out, but there's a property down in Middletown right now that's so functionally obsolescent. It's off the grid. It's beautiful. It's selling for about $1.8 million, but it's got a beautiful house. It's got a huge equine 10-stall stable with an arena inside of it, and it's got some tillable land, and then it's got an auto shop in the back of it. I ran this through the company, and it's perfect. It's $1.8 million. I can finance the whole thing in one loan. Now we can't do the whole $1.8 million. There's got to be an offset of what you have to bring in. So we'll be willing to go to 80% on that. You have to bring 20% of your own funds, but we can use, in that case, some of the money from some of the earnings on it to facilitate the payment for the mortgage. But that gets tricky. But you just have to call me, and I'll work through it. Another.
So, Jason, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have another example, though, too. So it just doesn't have to be hobby farm, right? Let's say you have 20 acres of I'll use the word hobby farm. Let's say you have 20-acre hobby farm with acres dedicated to a vineyard. Right, and then you have a second guest home on the property with a 3,000 square foot insulated building. Let's say that you don't want to mess with the vineyard, right? And they don't want you to be the income producing person for the vineyard. But if you had someone that wants to run a vineyard on your land, but you just want to live in that beautiful chateau overlooking the vineyard, that would be what I would do. So if you look at Chateau Boudet over by the Bohemia, now I've brought that property to these people for consideration, but it's too large. It's $10 million. They just don't want to go that high. They'll go to say $5 million, right? But similarly, if you want to live in that big house and someone wants to manage a vineyard, they could potentially do that. Barnuminiums are now some of the hottest things out there. They'll do a shed home, a shouse they call it, or a barnuminium steel-sided home. Living area must be 1,000 square feet, but you can't have any livestock in the barnuminium. Some of the things.
And they're absolutely beautiful. I just built one on my property. They're absolutely
stunning.
Beautiful.
Now I have products that do the construction, Ralph, so if your listeners want to reach out to me for any type of product whatsoever, I'm a mortgage person first. I'll figure it out regardless. But at the end with these people here, if you have huge acreage and stuff, this might be the program. The things that we cannot do, I can't do a full-time farm operation commercial business where you've got 1,000 head getting their necks locked in and we're milking them, and you got thousands of chickens. I can't do that. That's not me, right?
No, absolutely.
Nor can I do like a veterinary clinic or anything like that. No,
Hey, listen, I know how that is. Listen, yesterday, this tells you, so I'm an accountant by trade, but yesterday I had to put my farm hat on because it was vet day on the farm. So we're out running the herd through the head catch, making sure they're up to date. And we do all organic stuff, but making sure they're all looked at by the vet and all that sort of thing. So I totally get where you're going.
Yeah, totally cool, right? I can't do unique known homes or, investment properties, but we are getting into vacant lands and lots. Currently, right now, they don't have it formulated, but they're working on releasing that to me. Bottom line, just getting it over to me. Here are some of the highlights, though, for the credit. I can do a 680 minimum credit score for all borrowers on that. As far as debt to income, for the listeners, debt to income is the amount of money you have in relation to debt for liabilities in relation to your gross monthly income. So they want to see 39 DTI up to 43%. So if you're on $10,000 a month, they want to see that your debt's no more than 3,900 in relation to 10,000.
And you're talking about the back ratio.
The back ratio, yeah, not the front. And no bankruptcies or foreclosures within the last 4 years, which isn't too bad. And then
no, that's not terrible.
And then I can do some cash out and stuff for hobby farms. There's some stuff there. And then if I may have, and then here, yeah, so sorry about that. Yeah, that just gets, hey, but here's some good things about the appraisals, and this is good for the listeners if they want to do a hobby farm thing. So check this out. So comparable properties, and this may hit home with you, Ralph. Comparable properties, I can use comps within a 50-mile radius of the subject property within the last 12 months. So that is beyond.
And that's huge because a lot of times people are looking at these particular financing deals. There are no comps close. Mm-hmm. There just aren't.
So that's a big one.
Aren't.
Yep.
So that's huge.
Yep. And that's it. That's it for that one right there, man. I mean, that's a.
Cool, Jason. Well, listen, I'm going to bring this to a close here, but it's been a pleasure having you on the show. So I just wanted to leave you a second to let us know how our listeners can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my cell phone, it's 302-983-6731. And then you can find me on Facebook, or you can find me on the web at give me 1 second.
Yeah, we're going to have all this in your guest profile.
Yeah, you'll have it in my guest profile.
So it'll all be there.
Yeah, I think the best thing would be just to go to my guest profile, or just Google search Jason, Jason, and my last name, B as in boy, Ochniak. I show up on the internet everywhere.
Awesome, Jason. Well, listen, it's been great, and I thank you all our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Ask Ralph. We hope you found today's discussion informative and valuable. I certainly did. If you have any questions or topics you'd like to cover in future episodes, please feel free to contact us. And remember, this episode was brought to you by Saggio Accounting. Choose Saggio Accounting for all of your tax and accounting needs. And you can visit AskRalph.com to learn more about how Saggio Accounting will help you achieve your financial goals. And thanks again, Jason. We really enjoyed you being on the program today.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on the Ask Ralph podcast. And with a simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. And remember, financial issues don't have to be complicated. Just ask Ralph. The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media, Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.